Councilmember Burns? Okay, she's not there. Councilmember Kelly?
Here.
Councilmember Newsma?
Here.
Councilmember Reed?
Here.
Okay. Chair Livingston?
Here.
Member McMillan?
Here.
And Member Rikus?
Here.
Okay, so we have a quorum.
Okay, very good. So thank you everybody for doing this one virtual. I think there's several. It's made it easier for this meeting. So why don't we go ahead and go into public comment?
Okay, let's
It looks
see.
like we have several people.
Yeah.
So I will call out the names, and if you want to speak, go ahead. We have Carl Klein. If you want to say something, please speak up now.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a time limit? Just like 3 minutes or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Something
Okay,
on that order.
I
Yeah.
can keep it under that. So fine.
Okay.
So let's acknowledge that residents don't want to feel nickeled and dimed with added taxes and fines. According to Jonah Meadows from the Patch, with more than 30% of total housing costs going to pay property taxes, Evanston has earned the dubious distinction of having the state's most burdensome property taxes. The average American household pays nearly $2,200 in property taxes annually, according to Census Bureau data. Evanston residents, on the other hand, pay an average of $8,228 in property taxes. The city of Evanston is the 7th highest in the nation's property taxes. Marty Lyons, former assistant city manager and chief financial officer for the city of Evanston, sent a memo on April 18th, 2017, a Northwestern University tax-exempt property analysis, and he found that Northwestern University should be paying the city close to $29 million each year as part of the city portion of their property tax levy. Yes, this was a simple analysis, but it revealed that Northwestern University, the largest landowner in the city, is not contributing an equitable amount through a plan for payment in lieu of taxes. Northwestern University has 237 buildings with a combined 11 million plus square feet on over 240 acres. Northwestern University has an endowment of over $10 billion, which generates interest annually. The city of Evanston should request Northwestern University to use the proceeds of the interest earned on the endowment to pay the estimated $29 million each year while leaving the principal of the endowment intact. If this was truly equitable, the city of Evanston would request and demand that Northwestern University pay their fair share of taxes or contributions in lieu of taxes. The city should start serious discussion of setting up a legitimate payment in lieu of taxes for Northwestern and other large tax-exempt organizations like the 2 hospitals, which put numerous burdens on the city. Thank you, and that's my comment.
All right. Thank you very much for your comments. Next comments?
Yes. So next we have Chuck Wasserberg. If you wish to speak, please speak now. Going once, going twice. Okay. Moving on to John Moore. If you wish to speak, please speak now.
Hey, Jess, thanks very much. I'm John Moore. I'm a resident of Evanston, and I live near Northwestern University, and I saw that the pilot program was on the agenda for tonight. You know, Carl gave a lot of the very good details that he just spoke about, and I obviously support all of that. I really support the initiation of the pilot program. I think it's going to be a win for the city, for its residents, and for Northwestern and other large nonprofits in the city. You know, I had not realized that there had been a 2000 referendum on this point, and until very recently. So it's kind of, I think this is long overdue to create a program like pilot. there was overwhelming support for something like this back in 2000, and I think it's long over to do that. Yeah, I think to Carl's other point, I think a more fair assessment of the tax, the avoided tax burden that large nonprofits in this city have would be extremely useful. And then an assessment, I think, as Pilot calls for, of what a fair and equitable contribution would be. I mean, right now we have very little idea of what the fair contribution would be in this city. And it is mostly left to Northwestern and other large entities to decide how to distribute their largesse when they distribute it. So we're really entirely, it feels very one-sided to me now. And I don't think all nonprofits are created equal. I've been on the boards of multiple nonprofits, and I see a distinct difference between large nonprofits that own a lot of property in the city and the other smaller nonprofits that are purely social service organizations, most of whom own very little property. So with that, I encourage the committee to move forward, and I'm delighted to have the existence of this committee now in the city to consider questions like this. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Jess,
The next,
Yep.
Yes, the next person, Mary Brazinski, if you would like to speak.
Hi, thank you. I want to say I really appreciate having this discussion also. And I agree with Carl and John and the things that they brought up, because our community has such needs for its infrastructure, its roads, and an undue proportion, I feel, of all that maintenance and falls on taxpayers to make sure that's okay. And then we all pay a certain amount of water taxes. So nonprofits that pay that, that's nothing unusual, or that is not a give to the city. That's just part of renting your own space and taking care of you. And I think that many other communities, I think like Stanford, Harvard, Yale, they have worked out a more reasonable arrangement with their private universities and other nonprofits to pay a proportion based on how much is there. So I think that, you know, it's nice to have the nonprofits. They do a service to the community, but they don't make the community. They're part of the community. And so they need to contribute their fair share too. So I hope we can come up with an agreeable something to help our city be better and reduce the tax burden on our own property owners. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Jess?
Then we have William Smith, if you would like to speak.
I am a reporter from Evanston now. I'm just here to report.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that was it. If anybody else is out there, please raise your hand now.
No, I was hoping to speak as well.
Sure, could you please state your name?
This is Mike Vasilko,
Thank you, go ahead.
6th Ward. So the first question is why this wasn't published on the city calendar to be a virtual meeting, since there's a couple of us here sitting in the room that was scheduled for this committee meeting. So in the future, if somebody could just pay attention to that so we all end up in the same place, I'd appreciate it. But I'm here tonight also to speak in favor of the payment in lieu of tax program, the pilot, as it's called, which is, you know, such a wonderful thing, considering that our city council and staff continue to spend money we don't have, and staff keep pushing us deeper and deeper into debt. We need a lifeline, and to try and reach back and get money out of large nonprofits, especially Northwestern, who, you know, unless somebody drags them to the table, they're not going to do it on their own. So I'm hoping this program can be a great tool in negotiating with them. My second question is, and I don't know if Hatish is on the phone or on the call, but I've asked several times about whether or not the the Budget and Finance Committee is going to receive a copy of the 2021 audit that was just completed. This is the year ending, the calendar year ending in 2021, December 31st. Supposedly it should be available since you paid the auditors $70,000 to prepare it. So I'd like a response, since I haven't heard back from Atish, that he's going to forward that to you. It should be a great tool for your committee as lessons learned, I hope, and what not to spend money on. And then lastly, I'd like somebody from the leadership of this committee to acknowledge that this group was formed, my understanding, my recollection, was formed to take a lead when it comes to the budget process, which we are about to enter into again in a few months this year. So my hope has been that this group would take ownership of the budget process and kind of steer council away from the reckless spending that's been going on for months and months and years. And you'll find it, I think, in that audit, when I looked at the one previous, you'll see the true debt that the city of Evanston actually is committed to, not what is normally reported as our debt, which includes the pensions, by the way. The pensions is something that should have been paid off more regularly than it has been. But again, circling back to item 1, please move forward with the payment in lieu of tax program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chuck Wasserberg would also like to speak.
Looks like, yeah,
Yeah.
looks like
Yeah.
Tricia Connolly
Yeah.
and Sebastian Knowles as well.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Should I go ahead? Sorry, I missed my turn before. I had a technical thing. Yeah, a lot of people had said very eloquent things about the pilot program, and I just want to express my support for this and looking into the program. I've lived in a number of different university towns, and there's always this tension and friction between the universities not paying their fair share and the city needing some, their support. And so I think it would be great for Northwestern and Evanston to lead the way in forming some kind of partnership around this. So I strongly support the exploration of this. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, have Sebastian next.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I mean, everybody's already touched pretty eloquently on the issue of creating a task force around the pilot program. Did a lot of work about this myself when I ran for mayor of Chicago, or not mayor of Chicago, mayor of Evanston. Evanston residents are hurting, and we don't have the ability to build large-scale commercial districts in Evanston. We have a pretty small area in comparison to some other cities and towns of our size. And this is a perfect opportunity for Northwestern to contribute to our community. And that doesn't have to be, cutting a $20 million check and giving into the city. This can be providing programs for residents and collaborating with the city in a meaningful way. So I'd love to see this go forward, and so we can take the first steps that are necessary in order to provide some relief to Evanston residents. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Tricia Connolly.
Thank you. Tricia Connolly, Second Ward. I won't take a lot of time here. I guess what I would also say is, beyond what's been said, I think in reflection of this last year, one example of how this could work different is we wouldn't be giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to North Shore Hospital. What would change is perhaps they would be coming to us saying, you know what, we are going to do our fair share here, and we're going to do some training to get people to get jobs for us, because, at the end of the day, there's a lot of needs in healthcare. And we've got the supply, they've got the demand, and that kind of thing, that kind of relationship is very helpful to everyone as well. So I think this is one of the many ways the pilot program can be very positive, and I look forward to a task force, that you all are going to push forward on this and create a task force and get this started. There's a lot of great models out there. Thank you.
Keep that.
And for public,
Jess, I'm sorry, that's it for public comment? Was that anyone else?
I don't see anybody else.
Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful comments. So I believe the next step is to review the minutes from the last meeting. So, are there any comments? If not, I can offer a motion to accept the minutes, which were posted with the agenda.
So moved.
And second.
All right. Okay, should we do a roll call on that?
Probably.
Yes. So Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed, okay, I think he said yes. Councilmember Newsma,
Aye.
Committee Member Reichus,
Aye.
Committee Member McMillan,
Aye.
and Committee Member Livingston.
Aye.
And I'm sorry that my hand raise wasn't high.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. So it's like it passed, and the minutes are accepted. Very good. So the next item on the agenda for this evening, and I know that we went through this in the last meeting to some degree, and I don't want to get into that same level of detail relative to the individual bonding, but was for Mr. Desai to take us through the current planning for the general obligation bonds. And I believe also we have an advisor. I would say just in setup for this, in my role in my business role, this is a very difficult time to issue bonds. And so I would just like to specifically talk about what's the environment to issue bonds, why have we come up with the amount that we are for bonds, and have we looked at any sort of alternatives that might sort of minimize any bond obligation at the moment, given the interest rate environment is not particularly conducive, and the transactional environment is a bit can be a bit choppy. So those were the items that I hope, Mr. Desai, you could help us go through with our consultant, Ms. McKenzie.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Chair Livingston. Yes, and I know last time we discussed, and I think we discussed just the projects. This is where, even I have invited Ms. McKenzie from Sphere Financial, who is our financial advisor for the bond issues and others. So she can talk about it, and I think Chair Livingston had an interest in knowing the environment where we are in the current interest rate environment. What are the other options? Can we do private placement of the bonds with banks, save some money and all those kind of things?
About the interest rate on the bonds. It's going to kill us. We've got.
Can you please, who's that?
200 million in bonds.
Can folks
The
mute
rate-
their microphones, please? Please mute your microphone, please.
So, and obviously, I have asked for like a tentative numbers. Interest rate environment is changing, but instead of hearing from me that, okay, the things change week to week, sometimes, kind of dramatic change, I thought, and when I heard from Livingston that he said, why don't you invite the financial advisor back so we can talk about it at length and explain the options, current interest rate environment, and what should we do, So that's why I would ask Ms. McKenzie from Spear Financial to take it over.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rafaelita McKenzie with Spear Financial. So as everyone has noticed, the market has been a bit volatile the last several months. And in fact, we had, maybe about 2 months ago, there were a couple of bond sales that we had scheduled, and we held off on those. And in fact, there were investors as well who were particularly staying put, so to speak, and not wanting to really jump into the market at that time. So the market did slow down a little bit, but we're starting to see some sales come back again. There are needs, there are local governments, and they have, construction needs. And so some of those needs are best met through the issuance of bonds. Now, Hitesh, you brought up private placement, and for a bond size as, let's say, $15 million for 20-year type bond issue with about 1.1 million estimated debt service annually, that's not an issue that is a candidate for a private placement. So private placement financing are typically shorter, 10 years or less, and we normally recommend the local government doing those type of an issue with perhaps your local bank. There are other banks out there, but we typically recommend reaching out to your local bank or the bank with whom you have a relationship with. Now, the financing that we're currently looking at, it's a twofold. We're proposing rather a new money portion, and then there's also a refunding portion. And I know Anthony, who also works with you, Anthony from Spear, he sent over some numbers run at the end of June. I looked at those interest rates, and they were at about 4%, maybe 4.2 or so at that time. Interest rates have adjusted a little, and I've seen, and there hasn't been a lot of bond sales, but there are a few. We keep hearing lumber is going down, so people are starting to get bids again on their projects and so forth. But we're seeing some adjustment or some settling with the rates so far. Things aren't as crazy as they were a couple of months ago, and so the interest rate.
This is Leslie McMillan. I guess I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit here. First of all, I remain unconvinced that we need to issue any debt. When I look at the budget, it looks to me like there's surpluses, and I don't know. I mean, I follow the markets daily. We have daily updates. Issuing debt into a very volatile market, unless you absolutely have to, seems like an irresponsible choice. So I guess I'm not fully convinced. The other thing, that I continue to go back to and I don't understand is why we are issuing long-term debt for projects that aren't long-lived. I don't understand the fact that we don't consider a line of credit, which I think could be a much cheaper alternative. I think that the rates would be lower, certainly than 20-year debt. Hitesh, again, I just remain completely unconvinced that we need to do any debt, let alone issuing into a market like we have. We don't, I don't think we have any idea. I think there's so much uncertainty out there in the capital markets that I don't think we know what will be happening in 3 or 4 weeks. There's just, too many factors. There's China, who's continued to be shut down. There's the situation in the Ukraine. There's, shutting down access to, nat gas in Europe. So, this just seems to me to be the absolute worst time we could possibly be financing something unless we absolutely have to.
Right, and I think,
So,
Ms. I mean,
McMillan.
you might have a valid point, but as I think to talk to Livingston, and he suggested to have this kind of conversation, and that's what we are, right? At least to know, it's not that, okay, you have to tell, okay, yeah, go ahead and do bonds or do the private, just to kind of get an overall sense for all other members of the interested environment and other financing options. Obviously, then
Well, yeah, I mean, they have every reason to tell us to issue debt. That's how they make their money. And, so, if we tell them we need, extra liquidity, of course they're going to say that. But, that speaking as a professional in the finance industry, I understand exactly. But I think as a committee, we need to be really responsible and looking at our balance sheet and saying, just like, people who are, with their personal balance sheet right now, they're tightening their belts. They're looking at, what do I have to do? Most people are, if they have a well-placed mortgage, they're certainly not going out and buying another home. So these are all things that we need to consider as financial stewards of the city.
Yeah. So Leslie, thank you, Ms. McMillan. Thank you very much for that. I think we have two issues here that we want to talk about. Okay. One is if we were to go to market now with some sort of debt offering, what are alternatives given the very volatile market that you were talking about and the very expensive market? Expensive today, might look cheap in a year. I don't know. But I know that regardless of amount, what are options that we should be considering besides the normal, 20-year type multi-tranche facility that we typically do? What are there any alternatives? And if we wanted to do what we've historically done, what's even our chances of getting that done in the environment? So what is the debt sort of instrument I'd like to spend a few minutes on, and then separately maybe get more of an understanding, Mr. Desai, about what sizing you're considering and why? Because I would agree with Leslie that in a market like this, it is a time to sort of, borrow the minimum on a long-term basis, given the volatility. But let's just talk first about what are the options besides, what we typically do.
And David, could we also cover off on the continued resistance to this notion of a line of credit? I don't really understand that.
Well, maybe we can understand. Yeah, I think that, any sort of short-term variable rate facility is going to be cheaper in this environment. So that would be another element, right? Besides a bond. What other options are there?
Do you want Ms. McKenzie to kind of at least talk about those options, or?
Sure, we would like for her to talk about those options. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, the line of credit is certainly as a home rule community, the line of credit is certainly one of the best option for the city at this time. And the reason being is the line of credit is typically you're only charged on the portion, that of which you've drawn. So if you do a line of credit for 20 million and you only use 5, then you're only paying on that 5 million. So that is actually the best option for the city right now. If however the city finds that there is in fact the need to at some point issue bonds. A couple of months ago, yes, the market was volatile. Things have settled a bit. However, the feds have been talking about increasing rates. And I was just on a call this week, and they're talking about maybe 50 or 75 basis points again. So in terms of timing, this is a better timing compared to later on down the road, let's say 8 months down the road or a year from now, if the city should decide that, well, we do want to at some point bond, and so yes, this will certainly be a better time. And right now we're hearing that there's at least 3 more Fed rate at least. 3 more Fed.
So if I can add on that, and I think Leslie would have the same sort of commentary. Long-term rates have already moved up to the expectation. They could go up further for sure.
Certainly.
But and at some point we absolutely will bond, additional money. It's a matter of is it a prudent and efficient move to go to some sort of variable rate shorter term facility, which granted could move up over time, might be unlikely to go to the 4% that you're mentioning on what a long-term rate is. So I think Jonathan also had a comment he'd like to add.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what is the typical rate for the shorter term line of credit at the moment?
Right. The last I saw, there was a bank offering maybe a little over 2% on a short term. So that's certainly something to consider.
I think you could
Can I-
probably
can I
do better.
just
I
add
think you
Is
could
there-
probably do
is-
better than that. It's SOFR plus some sort of amount, and we certainly should be able to. I mean, we work with enough financial institutions. I'm happy to make some introductions, if that would be something of interest. But no, I think we can do better than that. I'm happy to talk to our, our internal lenders at US Bank. I'm happy to introduce you to BMO, to Northern, any number of institutions.
In terms of the size of the line of credit compared to the size of a potential bond issue, how would that compare? Could we borrow as much as we need
the
through a
city-
line of credit?
Right. If that question is for me, the city can go out and get maybe a $20 million line of credit. That's not unusual.
Yeah. And again, the beauty, Jonathan, is you don't pay on what you don't use. And,
Got it.
we certainly shouldn't be, I think there was some resistance in the past because for some reason we were paying a non-use fee. There's no reason that we should need to do
Right. No, I paid off my HELOC, so
And the one thing I wanted to mention is we do have contacts with with really all of those banks you mentioned as well, Leslie. But when you think of the interest rates offered, again, it depends on the term of that, the financing. So there are a lot of things that, even in a private placement type situation, we're hearing that some banks are now going out a little bit longer than they have in the past. And we're also hearing that some banks are starting to not lend as much as they used to anymore with the changes in the market. So there are quite a few, there's some things happening, but these are definitely avenues that can be explored.
Yeah, I mean, and Jonathan, you can do what's called an uncommitted line, which is like for, a 365-day line that you then renew. Those are less expensive because banks are having to apportion less capital against those. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat here.
and the rates are typically variable though on a line of credit.
Yeah, it is. And then, what we've done with our clients is, if you see rates starting to move up, you always have the opportunity to, lock in if you feel like longer term rates are starting to move. And it buys you a little bit of time. Sherry, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, have we ever done a line of credit before?
We did.
I mean, we had a line of credit for one of the TIF funds, but it was under $1 million. So we did line of credit during the COVID time. We didn't know anything during the April, May. So we had a $15 million line of credit with the Byline Bank at that time, around 1% rate. Yeah.
Okay, I was just, if there's someone we've used, it might be easier to start with them. That was just my point.
I mean, I could easily get, that's a good point from Leslie McMillan. Yeah, I mean, I could.
Yeah, and then Hitesh, I know you have a relationship.
Banks,
Yeah.
And they could give me a rate. And again, sometimes, yes, I went with the Byline
Hitesh, I
and
think
did
you
not
have
go with the other bank because I had to pay the unused fee. In this case, I might have a 15 million and start using, depending on the working with our public works and the Lara big city engineer, what are our immediate needs.
Hitesh, I think what you should be doing is going to the banks where we have deposits and they're paying you 12, 13 basis points and they're making over 100 and start to squeeze them. I mean,
Right,
if
but
you've got
it's
Wintrust there that is making a lot of money off the city or whoever it is, that would be
right.
the best
But
place to start. And those
right, and absolutely, and
and
that's
those
why I go
deposits are
with the
precious
local
to
banks.
banks.
Yes,
And if you say,
yes.
listen, we're going to move our money somewhere else, that's very impactful.
Okay. So Sherry, would you like to follow up? I think
I
once you
just
go
had
ahead, Sherry, then I'll jump in. I don't want to
yeah,
bog us down.
I may have missed it, but what is the amount if we were to do a line of credit, if we were to do a bond, what is the amount that we're looking to raise?
So we wanted to get to that next, right? I think
Thought
first,
I may have missed it.
irrespective of 5 million, 10 million, 15, 20 million, what are alternatives to not just do what we typically do of issuing a multi-tranche 20-year bond into a not overly constructive market? So let's just learn more about what are alternative instruments, and then I would like to understand what the current thought is on sizing and why. But let's, Ms. McKenzie, maybe we could get some additional your thoughts. I mean, how do you think the rating agencies would view us going to some sort of a line of credit? Should it be committed? There are other elements as to how the rating agencies might view it. Structure.
Yeah, if the city going to, or perhaps starting with your local bank and getting a line of credit will certainly not impact your rating. There are a lot of other municipalities that do the same thing. And again, as Leslie mentioned, yes, it is certainly a cheaper route, even in terms of when you think about issuance costs, which you won't get with the line of credit. And so it is the best option right now for the city to consider versus bonding. Now, for what we did, we didn't just look at your new money or your proposed new money for this year. We also looked at your 2013B for potential refinancing for savings, for rather debt service savings. And it is one of the bond issue that is most likely to move at some point in the market. We're watching it. The numbers weren't where we needed them to be the last time. But for something like that, you would do what's called, and someone brought it up before, a private placement. And so with the private placement, the city would not go for a full bond rating. So again, that's another issuance, not doing a full bond issue, but more or less a term sheet type issue with a bank where we get a placement agent involved. And those are actually the most popular right now because they have lower interest rates. And we're also talking about maybe 4-year debt service on the 2013B bond issue, which is about $3.6 million overall debt. So for something like that, we certainly wouldn't want to go for full bond financing, is my point, but more for a private placement type financing where the cost is lower and we would not go out for a bond rating at all.
Mm-hmm. And can I ask one more question here? If we were to have a line of credit, how you said it's pretty typical for communities like Evanston. I mean, what percentage? Do you have a rough idea? Half the communities? Is it unusual that we don't utilize a line of credit in our financial structure?
No, we've seen where and I'll just use, for example, we also represent Aurora and they use a line of credit. That's another client that does that. And so, for example, they they don't have 20. I can't recall how much they have, but if you have 20 million, again, or 10, it's whatever amount you feel you need, or that will meet your needs whenever you need to tap into it, replace it, and tap into it. And it's revolving, right? So you can just always go back to it if there's any type of capital needs or needs that the city needs to address that does not necessarily have to address via bond financing.
Okay. Okay, so I think for the group, one, we would like to understand more maybe over the next month, assuming we have time. That's another thing I'd like to understand, how much time pressure we're under to get a bond done before we get to some sort of liquidity problem. Because if we're sort of stuck and we have to do something, then we need to understand that as well. So if there's urgency to raise the funds, that's one thing, but it would sure be nice to be able to spend several weeks, a month to really understand, look, is there a piece of this that should be in a credit line? Is there a piece that should be a private placement? Let's not feel beholden to sort of what we typically do, right? So how do we get to that? So Councilmember Burns, I see, has his hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, and if people can't hear me, I'll try to. I'm going under a bridge, but I was just curious with the line of credit. How long, once the interest rate is established, how long does that hold for?
It is a variable rate tied into any index. I don't know whether it's now SOFR plus whatever the 100 basis point, whatever. Yeah, I mean, so it is a variable rate. And generally you have to renew it every year. When I took it for 15 million during COVID, we renewed one time, and then finally I kind of, it was unused for a year and a half, and we had a healthy cash balance. So we kind of closed it. But yes, I mean, kind of to wrap up the whole thing, I see the focus on the line of credit. I can reach out to the couple of local banks, particularly as Leslie mentioned, where we have the deposits, and find out the rates. And I think, yeah, it would be kind of a relatively quick that we would have up to $15 million of line of credit in next like 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
How much are your deposits in total? Just sort of an average.
Deposits would be, I mean, total, I don't know exactly the number, but again, we are having a special deal with both the banks in terms of the rate.
Right, but just kind of average ballpark.
It would be, yeah, I mean, 60, 70 million. Byline is the higher because they have all the operating accounts, payroll, accounts payable, and all other special accounts which we have to maintain for federal grants and all that. Wintrust has some, yeah, and then we have quite a bit of kind of investments. Yeah, I would reach out to both. That's what I did in 2020, Byline and Wintrust, and they were quite competitive. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do that. I'm not saying that's what we've concluded we want to do, but I think we've concluded we want some options besides what we normally do. And if I think it's good news actually that we don't have a credit line in our structure right now, because if it makes sense, this is our opportunity to sort of fill up that bucket. Okay. So let's look at it. And also I understand I mean, it is a variable rate instrument. I understand, the concern that can and likely will go up. It will go up given what the Fed has said. It's just a matter of how long would it take for a current, let's say 2%, maybe a little bit less than 2%. How long would it take for that to get, up to the 4%? And you sort of saved all that money in the interim. And you're not locked into it for 20 years. So I know what we do at ITW, you look for times like this, maybe go up a little bit more on variable rate debt, wait for the long-term debt markets to sort of come back down, and then you can term out. That's the time to do somewhat of a larger bond to free up more capacity under your variable rate instrument. So really, I think what other people have said, it's a way to buy some time, and rates will go up. Absolutely. But it's a matter, they have to go up quite substantially to ever get to, what we're currently looking at for issuing a long-term bond. And who's to say we could end up paying more for a period of time. But one would fully expect that, with a reasonable amount of our debt being variable, we would end up saving very much in the long term to have some degree of variable debt in our structure. Councilwoman Kelly, sorry, I wasn't giving you a promotion there.
Yes, I just wanted to I think this is a great discussion, and I'm not sure who's on the bond subcommittee, but I hope you'll come back with a referral for our next meeting. But I just want to say, in addition to looking at line of credits or variable rates, I think we also have to determine, prove the need if we're going to be leveraging debt. So that's, separate, but one and the same. I mean, it's a different conversation, but that's absolutely essential. We've heard from some of the residents this evening. So it's not just about, okay, how much do you need? We're going to go with a line of credit instead of a 20-year go bond. I think it's also about really assessing and proving the need. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay. So I think we've concluded, and maybe we can move on to the second part of this discussion. I think we have concluded as a group, let's look at some alternatives. Let's look at a potential credit, line of credit, maybe a private placement if there's a piece that clearly we think we want to refinance because we could lock that in at a lower rate than what we're currently paying. So I think we've concluded we want to look at those two things. We have not ultimately concluded that the 20-year normal bond issuance is absolutely wrong. But it looks like there are some alternatives we want to understand more, and hopefully we have time before we would actually have a liquidity need to actually do that work for a few weeks or a month to understand what our options are. Is there sort of consensus on that point?
And absolutely, as I would reach out to both the banks, as I said, about the line of credit, and report to that next time,
Okay.
And meanwhile, do we need Ms. McKenzie? Otherwise, we can let her go if we are not talking the financial side.
I think it's fine for her to.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe we, Mr. Desai, we could talk to Ms. McKenzie separately to get some fellow expertise relative to what are the viable options for us
absolutely
to look at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So maybe now, Mr. Desai, let's just talk briefly about what amount of bonding you were anticipating and why. And I just want to be careful that we don't, go off in too many different directions here, but just to get a feel for what were you anticipating and why, and is there a range there?
Right. So, and I don't know whether Lara is there, maybe Dave Stonebeck is there. And the total bond was around 15 million. Obviously, we had accounted for taking out the maintenance items, which we are not going to bond. Even we were proposing to use part of the general fund surplus, maybe around $2.5 million, so that we can reduce the size of the bond. The total bond amount was around 16 million. I'll have to see that. Out of that, $10 million roughly, and again, I'm throwing, that would be what we call a tax-supported debt. And the other one would be paid for by like enterprise funds, like water fund, sewer fund, parking fund. Even within, I see this here, that the library has a portion of like roughly $500,000 in bond. I'm looking at their kind of fund financials and cash they are carrying. They are carrying almost 50% fund balance. So even we can exclude that. So when all said and done, we could come down to maybe a $10 million total bond issue from around $15 million.
Mm-hmm.
And out of that, roughly maybe 7 million is a tax-supported debt.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think that's consistent with.
Okay, let's see if I'm wrong. I mean, Lara is here, so she can give the kind of a little bit more precise number.
When we did this discussion last month, we had modified the amounts so that it was about 9.8 million for the tax supported debt. But then for parking, we had shown around 965. For water, we had shown 6.4 million. So the numbers are very close to what Hitesh is saying. We can relook at it. We've gotten some project information in that we didn't have a month ago. I just haven't had a chance to update that yet, but it's probably going to end up very close to that.
I'm a little bit confused. So Hitesh, you said we have on average around 60 million in deposits. So I guess I'm kind of trying to figure out why we need to bond.
Right. It has all the funds, and every has it like if it's like we carry
it's a fund accounting,
right
so it's all
right now. Yes, right now we are carrying a lot of ARPA money, which I cannot use it except for the eligible project.
Maybe I guess if we could get kind of a breakout of the deposits of what's spoken for and what isn't.
I mean, so but
because I don't think now is the time to kind of set up big pools of money for maybe go, what do we think we might want in the future? I think it's time for belt tightening.
And yes, I mean, you can look at it, but I mean, I think last time or before that, I think Chair Livingston asked me why we have 35 funds. And because we have to carry for 5 different federal grants, 5 different TIF funds, 5 different special service area funds. So yes.
Right. I mean, and I wouldn't pretend to be a fund accounting expert, but if we could have sort of, high level, what can go where, what's.
I mean, we have the monthly financials with the fund balance and cash balance by each fund.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
and
maybe
this
we
is
can.
Sherry. I
Yeah,
just
go ahead,
have
Sherry.
one idea could be, is there like a way that you could chart the liquidity needs? The 15 million or 10 million, when do we need to disperse that out? Because that might make a choice whether we use a line or a bond, if it's something that we're going to need in
Right,
month
or a private
2.
placement.
Or private placement. So I think it would be helpful for me to piggyback off Leslie as kind of this liquidity chart over the year. What are we going to need? And then what can we use from the current funds that we have to pay for that? And where are we really short? And what months will we be short, or is it all at once? And I think that information can help us decide on the vehicle.
That's an excellent point. I mean, aside from, pardon me, just had to hit the sneeze button there. Aside from some type of borrowing, also, just minimizing the amount of time that debt is actually outstanding is also, I mean, probably it's more important than actually the rate. So we do have, as Ms. McMillan brought up and Ms. Reichs, we have somewhat of a bloated balance sheet, right? We have a lot of cash, and the last thing you want to do is sort of fund debt, issue debt to subsidize, a larger than necessary cash position, right? You ideally want to bring both of those down to the minimum that you would need. I understand it's a complex, sort of legal, it's not exactly like a corporation. There's a lot of reasons why we have to keep money in certain pots, but that's another excellent point to understand is what could the 60 million, is there a way to manage that differently, have the fund structure differently so that we only needed 40 million, right? And then you've got a free bond issue right there that you didn't need to do because you've generated 20 million in cash flow. So, Councilmember Newsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Hitesh. The 60 to 70 million, is that typical in any year, or is that artificially high for now because of the ARPA deposits?
No, I mean, that's kind of typical because ARPA has put us a little over that, and that's why I gave the more like and what we are typical, 70 and 75. And again, it's depending on that. Like when we have received the property tax for 2 months in March, April, and even in August, September, we are at a high point. And then we run out, and then we call it dry months, May, June, July, and at the same time in September, October, November, even December, where we don't have the property tax money and a lot of other expenses and whatnot. So our cash balances tend to be low right around November, December.
All right. So, but my ARPA isn't skewing the numbers that we've talked about tonight. Okay, thanks.
Okay. And I would say in lumpy cash flows is exactly where you use a credit facility, right? To be able to draw down that credit facility in periods of low cash flow, but then not have unnecessary borrowings at some point in the year. So I think that it sounds like there's some variability. Maybe the amount of bond issuance doesn't have to be 15. Maybe it can be 10. Maybe we can look at that further relative to, does the 60 million need to be that? Are there ways to more effectively manage the cash to bring down the amount of cash, really debt that is supporting that cash in some ways, right? So I think that's another point that maybe we could make some progress on over the next several weeks of what's the amount we think we really need, what's the instrument that we think is the best, most efficient way to get us, there, recognizing that there is some degree of interest rate risk. But again, it will be, the alternative is to issue a 20-year bond at 4%. We know that's higher, right? So Councilmember Nuzma.
Thanks. Yeah, just for clarification, if we're having a holistic look at the city's overall debt load, we also would need to consider low interest loans, like the IEPA loan, which funds a lot of the work in the water department. So I just wanted to put that out there too. There's more to it than just bonds.
We already have substantial, I think I'll have to see the balance sheet, IEPA loans as of now. We are already using for one of our big projects. I think Dave can talk more about it.
And those are typically backed by water revenue. They're not general obligation bonds.
It is IEPA loan, but it's not a revenue bonds, because when you issue the revenue bonds backed by the revenue source, they are generally cost you higher than the GO bonds.
But
I have a question.
In the case of the $30 whatever it was million IEPA loan that we approved last night, that debt service was coming out of the water fund and would be paid by wholesale customers, not by Evanston taxpayers.
Correct.
Councilmember Newsma, this is Laura Biggs again. You are correct, and we have quite a lot of IEPA loans. IEPA loans typically have a 20-year life, and because we funded so much of the long-range sewer program with IEPA loans, we are retiring some debt every year, but also generally entering into new debt fairly frequently. The IEPA loans do pay for assets that have a life that is usually substantially longer than 20 years, and the city has to document that our rates and our finances will cover the cost of the debt payments. So it's very methodical what the Illinois EPA requires for that.
How much do we have out in IEP loans?
Around $40 million as of December 31st, 2021.
Thank you.
And are those bonds as variable? Are those rates typical of the 4%? Have they gone up to the 4% rate, or are they subsidized through the state?
They have a set rate, so I think right now, what, Lara, is under 2%?
Okay, right.
They set the rate for the year, and we have found it generally to be at about half of what we would pay in the municipal bond market. But I'm not certain of this year's rate.
Okay, so that's not subject to some of the issues we've been talking about of lack of execution, high rates. It's a subsidized rate, doesn't have some of the same variables. And
absolutely.
Yeah,
it's
a little bit of a different bucket. Okay. So I know we have other things on the agenda. I don't want to, if everyone's comfortable, I think we've concluded some good things here. Let's look at some alternative structures, see if we want to do it. Let's look at how do we minimize the amount that we need to bond, through available cash or just through a new surplus, or any sort of new projections on the money we need, and you also get a view on how that we would go up or down throughout the year. So again, I think it's a good position that we're not using a credit facility today, because if it belongs in our structure, then good, let's introduce it, and we have capacity, right? So that then I think there's a lot to know more, and let's get some more information. But I think that if everyone's comfortable, we can move on to the next subject for the meeting.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's terrific.
Great. Okay. All right. I'll try to go through very quickly the next subject, which are subgroup topics and progress. And let me bring up a presentation. So we had talked in the last. Let me try to bring this up. A window. See here. Okay. Share. Hopefully I bring up the right thing here. All right. From the beginning. So can everybody see that? Can people see the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So we had talked before in the last meeting about potentially breaking up into 5 subgroups of a couple of people to sort of give some focus study or thoughts on a couple areas that I think, if we really had a good understanding of, would really push us further down on understanding. and this is where I thought we had left it. All of this presentation I want to go through is subject to revision, but it's just sort of what I took out of our last meeting. And then I also tried to just put together some very subject to the group's view, my thoughts on what I think that group might want to start looking at. But again, it's up to the group to decide what they want to do. Okay. So the first is on improving the presentation and timeliness of the financial updates to the council. And we had thought in the last meeting, Councilmember Newsma and Sherry could lead that. I know they've already done some work relative to that, but that would be a focus area for them to look at. The number 2 item, it would be, I think we need to put together a financial framework that we get more comparison between what our actual spend is, what the budget is, what we've done historically. I've tried to do some work, but there's still a lot to do on how it's not going to be perfectly right, but how do we get more of a rough functioning model to project out into the future, different discrete revenue streams, expense streams, so that we have, myself, I just feel like we don't have a wonderful planning tool to either understand the last 5 years or the next 5 years. So I would like to work on that with Councilmember Reed and myself was the idea. I think that's where we left that. Then we could have a group look at pension and planning. Okay, so Councilmember Wynn and Sherry could take a focus on that. Sherry's got some very good expertise in that area. On debt planning, Councilwoman Kelly and myself could focus on debt planning. That's just some of what we were just talking about. And then
I just say, David, though, it does seem that 4. So obviously when I think of debt planning, I'm also thinking about our pension obligation, our debt. So right. I do feel like there's some, 3 and 4, I don't think we can really separate.
Right. Maybe we can talk about that separate. I think there would certainly be some interaction between the two. And I agree with you. They're both debt of a different name, right?
And on the pension side has both the investment side and the return and the return projection. So I think
it's a little different.
I was kind of looking on that end.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other side is the debt. So that was my interpretation.
Yeah, David, I would roll into debt planning, also kind of assessment of need.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's in some of the, and I have a detailed page. I don't want to spend too much time on every page on what I think that group might want to start looking at. Okay. And then the 5th item being capital budgeting. Okay. Where Councilmember Burns, Leslie, you could particularly look at items related to capital budgeting, approval analysis. I would include repair and maintenance in that, some areas that you've expressed some particular interest in. And there's a lot we need to do. Okay. There was a public comment earlier that, we need to take the lead on budgeting. I don't think we're in that position right now. I think we are still very much in the information gathering and really getting a deep understanding of individual, financial planning elements. We want to get there. But ultimately, once we have a great understanding of these first 5 items, I think it pushes us into, well, what are cost saves? What are additional, sort of revenue sources? And I'm not talking about in that necessarily. It could be an element. The discussion earlier on not-for-profit sort of contributions. But so then I also, and we'll send this around. My recommendation, and I would really like it if we could start making more progress in between meetings, although I know everybody is really busy. I went and then thought about every one of these, and again, these are just my thoughts. But the council member Newsma and Ms. Rikus, you would fill this out, redo this, and also for every one of these areas, we need, I believe, to assign a city staff partner. Okay, and I think that all roads can't go back to Mr. Desai or one person. How do we split this work out so that there is a primary city staff partner that can really help make some progress here. So I don't need to go through all these, but on financial updates, review current reports, benchmark with comparable communities. I think you've done a lot of this. Again, I don't think we have the time to go through all of them, but I'll send this around and really would want each group to take ownership of what they think the major initial tasks are and when they think they could get back to our committee on what they've learned and what their suggestions are. So that would be financial updates, financial modeling, who's the right person for us to work with. There's some items that I had on here that I, based on the work I've done, that I would like to get into further. Pension planning, again, we need a city partner. Understand what our plans are, really make sure we have them all understanding. I don't think there's a way to really fully understand this without having some degree of understanding of what the nature of, what the source of the current deficits are. Was it underfunding? Was it performance? We kind of are where we are in some ways, in many ways, but I think, we always learn by kind of understanding how we got here. Maybe meet with the actuary, and so we can use it in the other part of our long-term planning model of what do we think contributions are going to have to be over the next 5, 10, 20 years. So again, I don't need to go through all these. Debt planning, understand the debt portfolio, what our immediate needs are, things we talked about today. Meet with the bond advisor, we just did. We need to agree on an amount for what's the instrument and timing that we want to do in 2022. But then also, how do we think about our overall debt load? Okay, that's one thing I would like to, you look at a company has some very sort of generally accepted measures of how leveraged is a company. Well, how leveraged is Evanston? There's a lot of debt, okay? But where do we stand relative to where we should be relative to revenues or whatever it might be? So I think that's something that really builds into our long-term projection model. And then finally, capital planning. Who's the right person to work with Councilmember Burns and Ms. McMillan on, again, how do we get to the capital plan? What's been done to date? How do we prioritize? I think how are things approved, and how do we do some retrospective analysis are some items that but again, you would own this. So that is, let me stop sharing here. Stop sharing. That's what I'm hoping that everyone agrees would be very useful if we have to divide and conquer. And I think we start with those 5 areas that we talked about before, but really try to put some meat on the bones. And what is our work plan? Who is the person in the city that we can work with so that we can make a bit more progress in between meetings? And if we really had great understanding of those 5 items, I think we would be in a far better position to make, very constructive recommendations to the council on things that would, improve our financial situation. So I'll, with that, maybe see what other people's thoughts are on that. Yeah. So, my Councilmember Reed.
Yes, I'm sorry if I missed a vote or two. I stepped away for Animal Welfare Board, which invited me to speak there. My apologies. I should have signed off for a second. But Mr. Chair Livingston, I really appreciate. I think you and Councilman Michelle, what it's like to be a super chair quite often. So I'm appreciating this and I appreciate your thought there. Hitesh, I'm wondering. Staff in your department do you think is available to assign to these various working groups? I don't know if we've discussed that, but do you have the staff available, and what resources might we need if you don't?
I can clearly hear you. Was that my problem?
I think I was a little bit distorted, Mr. Desai, but I think the question is, do you have, I think we would look to you to say, who are the 5 people we can work with, right? And hopefully it's not a highly substantial part of their job. It's like the rest of us, right? How do we create a couple hours a week or whatever it might be to make some progress and assign a person who makes, you know, the most sense to work on these individual areas with the people that we've assigned. So would you be in a position to make recommendations as to who that should be?
And you're talking about the city staff, right?
Yeah, the open city staff position.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let me look at this thing, you know, your 5 major items, and then, yeah, I would talk to the staff internally, and then we can come up with that. Yeah.
How many folks, sorry, Chair Livingston, if I may, how many folks do you have in your department, Hitesh?
We have the right across the clerk's office, the collector's office have 5 or 6 people.
Well, yeah, I mean more so in the yeah, I know you run the collectors. I mean, like in the actual, you know, like budget analyst.
Right now, as I see the finance, there's no budget manager. Jess, who has started in January as a financial analyst, so she's supporting that. And then we have one accounting manager who can do all this. I mean, his main focus is on accounting, auditing day to day. But yeah, he can focus on some analytical piece. And
I'm picturing the gentleman. Can you say his name? Is that Villeman or?
Yeah, Andy Villeman. And
Yeah,
then we have a purchasing group right now of 2 people, but they have a lot less, kind of on this side.
In this level. So you really only
Right.
have 3. It's you, Jess, and Mr. Villeman. And
Right,
really more
but
so
right
in
now-
some regard, just you and Jess, because Mr. Villeman's kind of in a.
Right. We are recruiting the budget manager. So yeah, most likely we would have a 3rd
3.
person, so we can
Okay.
support that. One of those things which could fall outside of the finance is the projects, the capital projects, where Lara is the kind of a main point of contact. I cannot talk about any projects and funding source. I mean, I can talk about the funding side, but yeah, how critical is the project and when would we need the money, how much? So yeah, Lara.
So this
could
might be a
good-
cross-department kind of ordeal, and that might be where we get some of the support, a mix of finance department staff and maybe Laura staff as well.
Right. So
Okay.
if you have a questions about the projects, technical side, and all that functional side, operational side, Lara or any department can talk about it. If it's more financial side, then yes, I can talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think that's good. Maybe think about that, because I was thinking, yes, that maybe Ms. Biggs would be, the perfect addition to that capital projects group, or someone in her area. So, okay. So, Mr. Desai, will you come back to us in a couple days and say who can we work with, and then I think people can break into. Hopefully, everybody understands what their area is, and we can try to make some progress and potentially have a group or 2 just give an update, in
Right.
periodic meetings as to where we are.
The same way in pension, since you brought it up, that's one of the other big areas. Investment side is more or less transitioning to a central pool. It is mixed. I think we have fire pension fund has gone to the pool. Police is still kind of not full, transferred. So, but in terms of contribution with the actuarial, so where we needed, I can tie up and coordinate with the actuary. So if you have any specific questions, how we come up with these things and what we can do to kind of make it more. There are always various options. As I mentioned, I think a couple of months ago at the pension obligation bonds. Obviously, that is too expensive and out of the thing. But yes, actuary could be a great asset when we talk about the pension side.
Absolutely. I mean, to come up with a table of what's our funding goal and what are the contributions over 5, 10, 20 years, right, to get to X, Y, and Z. So that would be very useful to have to plug in then to our long-term model, so we can understand what's that mean, what does that mean relative to our overall liquidity over that period of time. Okay, very, very good. So I think, to keep us on the agenda, I think next is Councilwoman Kelly to go through the pilot program, which was also mentioned in public comment. Would be
Great,
the
thank you.
next item. Yeah.
So this is just for discussion this evening. So, unfortunately, we don't have all the documents aren't there. The referral isn't there. I'll share my screen and I can show you some of these documents if that would be helpful. But I want to make it clear, this is for a task force. So we wouldn't determine here nor at council what an actual pilot program would look like. This is about creating a committee, a special committee of the city council, like what we are as finance and budget, to work alongside representatives from some of our largest tax exempt institutions. Mostly that would be educational, the University of Northwestern, and some of our hospitals. And the idea is to really examine that relationship between the city and the institutions and to understand the impact on local revenue, and to determine sort of to work collaboratively to really establish a framework that we all come to agreement on, of sort of a consistent and reasonable what could be contribution or goals. And this is all voluntary. I'm very deeply familiar with Northwestern's charter. And also, I don't think I need to go on. Of course, we all value and esteem Northwestern. You know, it's a tremendous asset, as we are for Northwestern. And I, in particular, have very deep personal connections to Northwestern from its inception. And my youngest son, who graduated from there a couple of years ago. So, so I just want to say that. So the idea is, and again, the idea of creating this task force, this has been done in hundreds of communities across the United States. It's high time. I think we've heard from residents. It's high time, Evanston, that we sit down and start to begin this conversation. And this will really strengthen the partnership between Evanston and the large tax exempt institutions in our city. And again, this is this would all be voluntary, but I just want to talk a little bit maybe to give an example of Boston. And again, we wouldn't be determining how this would look, but to feed sort of folks' imagination on what this could look like in Boston, which has one of the most famous municipal tax pilot programs. They started theirs in 2012 and went from getting about, just a little over $1 million actually to up over 40 million in 10 years in contributions to the city. So some of the ideas, so for example, in Boston, the way this works, and again, we wouldn't be determining what this would look like. I just want to emphasize that so we don't get too tangled up in that. In Boston, what they do is they look for any of the tax exempt institutions that are valued at more than 15 million. That's the threshold they establish in order to consider which institutions would sit at the table and be part of this, this framework. So it's 15 million or more. And then what they do is they determine what would be the value of their land, what they would receive if they were paying taxes. And the equation that Boston uses, for example, is they say, for example, these institutions ought to contribute 25% of what they would pay if they were paying property tax. So let's say Northwestern, Marty Lyons, and one of the speakers, Mr. Klein, made reference to a report. This is the only one we have right now from 2000, and if Mr. Klein is still on, I think it's from 2017, 15 maybe, that Northwestern would be paying somewhere upwards of 30 million in taxes if it were paying property taxes. So, you take 25% of that, a quarter of that, and that would be the amount. That would be the goal. And then what Boston does is it allows every institution to contribute up to 50% of that in community benefits, but not just anything. It's decided on. There's a whole. They decide together. The committee decides what are allowable community benefits. So in cash, it could be up to, in financial contributions, 50% of that, 25%, or the full thing. And what they've seen is every year, the amount of those contributions have increased every single year since 2012. Like I say, to the point now where they're, I think close to 40 million. So it's really been highly effective. It's like I said, it strengthens the partnership with your institutions. Everybody is at the table together. And so I've recommended and let's see, if you'd like, I could share, if you want to see it, it's just text and narrative, but I could share the proposal. But some of the essential elements are that, this brings transparency to the payments. There's consistency, a framework. So it's not just, this institution gives this much, but everybody's held to a certain bar. There's consistency. It's completely voluntary. And it's, it's based on the value of the real estate. That's really key. And I think we all understand why. All the speakers this evening all spoke to that. Right now, I think our property taxes, I think it's about 19% of our total of our, and Devon, you can jump in. I think it's about 19% of our revenue comes from property. I'm sorry?
19% of the tax bill total.
Right. Okay. And I'm sorry, Tash, pardon me. And so it's just, and it would be phased in also. That's another component that I would put on there, that this isn't something that, you sit at the table together, you decide on it, you decide on your formula, on your framework, and it gets phased in. In Boston, it was phased in over 5 years. So I think this will be a tremendous value to our city. I think it'll be a tremendous value to Northwestern also. As somebody mentioned, there was a referendum back in 2000, I think it was, and about 85% of the people came out and said, yes, please. I mean, they went and they voted. They really wanted to see greater collaboration, financial collaboration. And so I think I covered most of it. So I think the idea is that next week, hopefully we'll have all the documents. And again, I'm happy to share any documents now. I have, the Boston program, which will be up for our next meeting, as well as my referral, which should be up, and other, there's many documents discussing the value of this and how this has impacted other cities. And again, hundreds of cities across the nation. I can just rattle off some numbers of other, for example, Dartmouth, 8 million to Hanover. That's 10% of Hanover's budget of 80 million. Yale, 15 million to New Haven. Brown, 4 million. Princeton, 18 million. They actually, I think there was a group that actually sued them to pay a higher payment in lieu of taxes. Harvard, over 6 million. And we're kind of like at 1 million. So I know we can do much better. And again, I think this will be just truly strengthen our partnership. It'll strengthen the town gown. I think it'll be, really wonderful for all of us, for Evanston, for Northwestern. So, so you can ask questions. So again, this is to create the task force to look at how we would like to go about that, and looking at the many other examples. So we would discuss this in greater detail and take action on it at our next, to move this on to City Council to create this special committee of the City Council.
Okay. All right. Are there any other comments on this? Suggestion?
I think Devon has his hands up, and then I'm
Okay.
next in line.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think we need a super long discussion on this. I suppose we all pretty much support this. I just want to add Claire, totally agree. I think this should happen. I think we should have a pilot task force. My only add to this would be when you look at those models, particularly the model that you discussed in Boston, and let's take a quick look at the numbers you presented, which is 30 million. Let's adjust for inflation and just say it's around $40 million that Northwestern would pay in property taxes if they were to pay property taxes today. And then let's take that 25% of that 40 million number and say that was the baseline of what they would owe, which would be a nice even $10 million per year. When you look at that $10 million, Boston and many cities on the East Coast have they don't have as many taxing bodies as we do, and so they don't have park districts in the same way, or particularly in Boston's case, particularly school board, their school system is unified taxing body with the city. So in our case, of that 10 million that Northwestern would owe the city, owe the taxing bodies, 70% of that would be traditionally going to the school districts, so roughly 7 million of that, and then because as Hitesh and you both pointed out, roughly 19, between the city and the library, about 20% roughly of the tax bill.
So remember, this is payment in lieu. These are not.
Yeah, I know.
So this is all what we would decide. So this isn't your.
Hold on, Claire. Just let me finish. No one interrupted you. So what I'm saying here is that roughly the city would be getting, in this instance, under just following that same logic from the Boston model, which is, you know, as you said, the kind of nation's premier kind of model for this. You know, they would owe the city roughly $2 million per year, and then with that 50% reduction in in public benefits, they'd owe us about $1 million a year. So we're, you know, somewhere around what we should be getting. The city of Evanston, $1 to $2 million per year would be the money that the city would Northwestern would owe the city, but they would owe roughly $7 million to the school districts. And so I say all of that to say that I believe that the school district should definitely be a part of this conversation and should be at the table because, you know, we all serve the same taxpayers, and the school districts, the city stands to benefit from this, but the school districts really could stand to benefit from this and benefit the taxpayers. And I think Northwestern may be even more interested, as is I think Harvard or some of the East Coast Ivy League universities. They particularly like to donate their money to the school system in particular, see their funds used for the schools. And so I think Northwestern, being an educational institution, would likely want to see a lot of their funds be used for education-related activity. And so it makes sense, both given the amount of money that the school district would be traditionally receiving and that it's Northwestern. And then we can look at the hospitals and the other ones as well. And so I really appreciate you including not just Northwestern, but all of our large taxing bodies. So
Yeah.
my only add is the school districts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up about, and I have talked to Marcus Campbell about this already. I think initially this is a special committee of the city council, so we'll discuss that, but I think you're absolutely on target to consider. I mean, we all know that these institutions, we know they get service through streets, sanitation, snow plow, you know, all of this, we know that they do receive city services. In terms of the educational services, I agree. I think they also reap benefits from our schools. But I think that's something that we would discuss on this committee. So I don't want to make that, you know, I'm not making that decision, but I think you're right. This is something that has to be discussed and considered. Is this going to be shared, you know, with our school districts? But again, this would be part of what the task force would look at. So thank you for bringing that up. And you're right that some of these districts, such as, you know, Dartmouth, that is a unified district. So thank you. So yeah, so next week, hopefully we'll go ahead and vote on this and move this on to city council.
Councilmember Newsmar, you still have your hands up? I had mine up. I just want to make
Yeah,
sure.
I just thought, thank you, Councilmember Burns. Quick question, noting that this is a voluntary scheme, how did Boston, for example, get Harvard to voluntarily throw in any money?
So the way they do this, it's through, you know, kind of transparency and publicizing. And that's what they do. So they have a systematic way that it's publicized what percent each institution got to its mark. And everybody, you know, when I talk to the county, the city assessor in Boston, I've had many long conversations with him, Nick. Everybody sort of becomes, including the mayor, you're a little bit of a fundraiser. I mean, that's sort of the tedious thing, but that is part of everyone's understanding. And if there are large again, these are institutions that, you know, that are valued at over, like I said, 15 million. That's their mark. And
so there's
billion.
So it's not just Harvard, it's Boston College. It's,
oh yeah, it's a long, I think
whatever, Boston Latin, and you're looking at them all and they're competing against each other. So that's, if
so,
they
and
do
what
have an incentive, they don't want to look bad because they're being compared to
precisely
other nonprofits.
And it's publicized. Every year it goes out. Who's getting closest to their mark? Very few actually hit their 100% mark. But every year, you know, most of them increase. And what they're finding is that actually the hospitals come in the highest in terms of hitting their pilot goal. The universities are the next one. And the ones that come in, they also have a cultural. So they have three categories. They have educational, medical, and then cultural. Cultural comes in the lowest. So I don't know if we would have anything that's cultural in this town, probably not. But that's how they do it. And actually, the hospitals do come in on the highest in terms of
and the houses of worship are not part of the program.
No, because just because of the value of how there isn't.
Thanks. Councilmember Burns has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is definitely something I support. I too campaigned around this issue and know a lot about it and support it. I similar to even just a minimum standard with TIF when there's any discussion about taxes and in lieu of and how funds are used. There's a joint review board even for TIF for all impacted taxing entities are not invited, but they are a member. And so I'm not in strong support of waiting to invite them to the table. I think they have a reserved seat at the table. And I have pretty regular meetings now with Dr. Horton, so I will talk to him about this. It sounds like we've already talked to Dr. Campbell, but I will be talking to Dr. Horton, and I think they have a reserved seat at a table like this.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right. Is that, I think with that, we are sort of at time for the meeting. Yeah, Councilmember Kelly, anything else or on that point?
No, I think that's it. I won't do screen shares tonight. I think it'll be easier just to have all the documents. Jess has them. I gave her a bunch of documents today.
Okay.
So those will be uploaded hopefully shortly so that you'll have some time to look them over.
Okay.
I see that Sherry has her hand up.
I think Sherry has, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have
Yes, Councilman Newsma and I met to go over the financial statements. So what I'd like everyone to do maybe for the next meeting is go to the city council website under financials, and thank you, Adesh, because we're about 90% there. I think we've gotten it down to about 11 pages as of 40. But it's a pretty streamlined system. We've got last year's actual, this year's actual, last year's budget. The one thing we thought of, and we wanted to bring it to the group, was maybe spending 5 or 10 minutes, Hitesh, each meeting just on the general fund, because that's the largest, and maybe just explaining the categories, like do this at every meeting, just 1 or 2 categories, 5 or 10 minutes, no discussion, but just so we can all kind of get to speed on it. But maybe we could have some time at the next meeting to go through the financials with everyone. And we have some ideas how often we'd like them, how often they should go to the council board meetings and things like that.
I mean, it is like it goes every month. So the city council gets it every month and we post it on the website too.
Right. But I think there's been some changes and a lot more streamlined. So I thought maybe if everyone can review it before the next meeting, and then we can go through it, spend maybe 15 minutes and walk through how we would read them. So I think it would be beneficial for everyone else.
Great. And Sherry, maybe your group in particular, if we want to say every meeting, maybe 2 of these 5 subgroups just gives an update. Why don't we have the financial reporting group?
Great.
And maybe Mr. Livingston, if we can get together, or Chair Livingston, if we can get together, we can maybe be the other group.
Sure, that's fine.
It's kind of like getting a homework assignment.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Exactly.
Thank you, Sherry.
To mention we met
group
today on
leader.
this, so.
All right,
But
very
I
good.
thought we had to present today, so I wanted to be ready. So
Okay.
we'll be ready
Wonderful.
next.
Okay, so with that, I guess we can adjourn the meeting.
Yes, thank you.
Sounds good.
All right.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody.
Thank you.
We
Good night.
are adjourned. All right. Good night. Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody. Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.